The 26th of October, 2015, Nepal, an altitude of around 6,000 meters. Gerhard Fiegl is coming down from Nilgiri South, a summit that has been reached exactly once in its whole history, by a face nobody before him had climbed. The job is done. 1,500 meters, 3 days, the summit taken. All that's left is to get back down. He puts a foot down on a gentle snow step, the kind of place where you need no rope, no belay, no special attention. His two partners are standing a few meters away. What happened to him on his fourth day at altitude? And why could Austria's strongest climbers do nothing? Umhausen sits in the Tyrolean valley of the Ötztal, and about 2,000 people live there. This is where, on the 23rd of October, 1988, Gerhard Fiegl is born. Everyone who knows him calls him by the short version, Jerry. Almost nothing has survived about his family. Only the basics are known. He finishes primary school in Umhausen and secondary school in nearby Imst, which means a commute out of the valley. That's an ordinary path for a Tyrolean teenager of that time. What isn't ordinary is something else. How early the mountains stop being scenery for him and turn into an occupation. In the Ötztal, you can see the slopes from any window, but on its own, that leads nobody anywhere. The Bridge for Fiegl is a training group of the Austrian Alpine Club. The organization almost everyone in Austria passes through before they ever reach a serious level. There they teach you to handle a rope, read the terrain, belay your partner. And that's where rope teams form that will hold together for years. In the same village and the same group, there's Hans-Jörg Auer. He's 4 years older, a gap that at that age means almost everything. Auer is stronger, more experienced, more confident. On the rope, he goes first. Fiegl belays from below and copies his moves. Their training looks completely every day. The two of them get on their bikes and ride out to the Engelswan Krog, the local wall where they work on technique. Once a week, they train in the gym in Tumpen, the next village over. No expeditions, no sponsors, no cameras. Just two lads from one village climbing the same routes over and over until the movement stops needing any thought. Almost everything known about this period comes from a single source, the book Auer will write many years later. There's practically no other record of those years. Back then, nobody is interested in Fiegl. He gives no interviews, nobody writes about him. Outside observers only start putting his life on paper once the results get big enough that ignoring them is no longer possible. That happens in 2008. That year changes two things at once, and the first has nothing to do with rock. Fiegl builds not just his sport around the mountains, but his whole way of life. After secondary school, he enrolls at an HTL, an Austrian technical college that hands you a practical trade. Then he takes on meteorology. The reasoning is simple. Up in the high mountains, the weather decides more than climbing technique does, and a man who can read a synoptic chart gets an edge you can't buy with equipment. Where exactly he worked in that field, the biographies don't say. Alongside that, he qualifies as a certified mountain and ski guide. It's one of the most demanding professional exams in the country. The training stretches over years, the dropout rate is high, and afterwards the guide carries full responsibility for the client. Later, he starts working as an instructor, teaching the people who are training to become guides themselves. He also joins the Mountain Rescue Service. It's volunteer work, which means turning out on call in any weather at any hour of the day or night, often for people who got into trouble through their own mistakes. A rescuer sees the mountains from the inside out, from the side where the consequences land. The same year, he's taken on to Salewa's Alpine Extreme team. That's the first outside trace of his career. Until then, he was known only in a narrow Tyrolean circle, and now a gear manufacturer stands behind him. Professional sport in climbing doesn't work the way football does. A contract rarely covers your living, but it gives you equipment, expedition, support, and standing. On his own website, Fiegl puts his position into words that will be quoted again and again afterwards. He writes that health and contentment matter more than mountains, ascents, and grades. That being healthy and fit is not something to take for granted, and that the situation can change in a single second. Those words are written by a man who by then has seen plenty, as a rescuer, as a guide, and as a meteorologist used to counting probabilities. There's no gloom in them and no bravado, just clear eyes. By this point, he already has routes behind him that people travel to the Dolomites from all over Europe to climb. The second change of that same year happens on rock. On the Dre Zinnen, he climbs a route called Perlen voor die Soja, graded 9-, first try, no prior inspection, no falls. In climbing, an ascent like that is called an on-site. You read the wall as you go and find the answers where other people spend weeks rehearsing the moves. A year later, he's in Yosemite climbing the nose on El Capitan, the most famous big wall route on the planet. A year after that, he climbs the north face of the Eiger by the classic Heckmare line, the very one where the events of the 1930s turned that wall into a legend. All of these are other people's lines. Somebody else laid them out, hundreds have climbed them before him, and everyone who follows is repeating a problem that's already been solved. Every strong climber goes through this stage. First you prove you can do what the best do, and only then do you ask what you're capable of yourself. His own lines begin in his home valley. In 2010 and 2011, Fiegl puts up 2 mixed routes in the Utstal. Mixed climbing means ground where ice alternates with bare rock, and you move with ice tools in your hands and crampons on your boots, hooking steel points onto holds a millimeter deep. The first route he calls Tension and grades M12+. The second, Encore, he grades M12 to M13. At that moment, that's the ceiling of the discipline. There is almost nothing harder in Europe. Around the same time, he puts up Coco Jambo on the south face of the Marmolada, the biggest sheer wall in the Dolomites. By the age of 24, a rare picture has come together. Usually a climber specializes, rock or ice or mixed. Fiegl is holding the top level in all 3 at once. But there's a frame around all of it that he hasn't stepped past yet. Every one of his routes fits into a single day, or a little more. Out in the morning, back in the evening. The body never has time to get properly tired, or the head to properly give out. The first step beyond that frame happens in Alaska. First, though, comes one more route in the familiar format. In 2013, he climbs the central pillar of Freyne on Mont Blanc, which has the reputation of being one of the most serious lines in the Western Alps. The real change happens across the ocean. In May and June of that year, Fiegl turns up in the Ruth Gorge, a deep gash in the middle of the Alaska Range, ringed by walls you can only reach in a small plane with skis instead of wheels. His partner is Alexander Blumel from Mötz, a village half an hour's drive from Umhausen, another Tyrolean, another man out of the same world. The first thing they do is put up a route on a peak called the Gargoyle. The line comes out 650 meters long, with free climbing up to 7A+, and sections of aid climbing graded A3, where you make progress by weighting placements you can't trust. They name the route Beauty and the Beast. Then they take on a problem of a different order, the Tooth Traverse. It's a ridge chain. You have to cross several towers in a row, climb up each one and down off each one, and there's nowhere on it to stop and sit things out. The route had been done before them, but nobody had managed to repeat it. Fiegl and Blumel become the first to manage it. The traverse takes 83 hours of unbroken work, 3.5 days of movement in which sleep turns into short blackouts on the spot, food into whatever fits in a pocket, and every decision has to be made by a head that's been running on empty for days. This is nothing like a one-day route of any grade. What gets tested here is the stamina of the mind, staying able to function long after the body has burned through its reserves. The report on that expedition for the American Alpine Journal, the main archive of world mountaineering, is written by Fiegl himself, a detail that says something about his role on the rope. He's also the one who writes things down and makes sense of what they've done. After Alaska, his format changes for good. One day is no longer the limit. Now he thinks in terms of a multi-day continuous push, a climb that starts and doesn't break off until it's finished. That approach reaches its extreme form in Patagonia. In January 2014, it's the wind that meets Fiegl. Because of it, the windows of good weather here are measured in hours rather than days. His partner this time is Simon Giedel, a South Tyrolean from the Italian region next door to Austria. The objective is Fitzroy, 3,406 meters, a granite tower you can see from tens of kilometers away. They pick the Supercanaleta and climb it without stopping. The logic is the exact opposite of the classic expedition approach, not to break the climb into days with bivouacs, but to push straight through it while the weather holds. Everything surplus stays at the bottom. No tent, no sleeping bags, no several days' worth of food, only what's needed to keep moving. They're on the summit on the 23rd of January at 3:30 in the afternoon. 21 hours and 30 minutes have passed since they set off. The descent takes another 10. The full round trip comes to 31 hours and 30 minutes. For a route of that length, that's very fast. That same year, Fiegl climbs the Colton/McIntyre on the Grandes Jorasses, and in 2015, the Walker Spur, both among the most respected lines in the Alps. By this point, his method is fully formed and never lets him down. A small team of 2. Minimum equipment. Continuous movement instead of bivouacs. Speed is the main form of safety. The less time you spend on the route, the smaller the chance that bad weather or rockfall catches you out. He didn't invent this logic. Plenty of strong climbers work this way. But it has a price that doesn't show up straight away. Speed requires everyone on the rope to hold the same pace. As long as the pace is shared, the method gives you an advantage. The moment one person loses that pace, the same speed starts working against everybody. Across all these years, not a single source mentions any serious injuries, any falls, any friction inside his teams. Not one episode where something went wrong. The life of a man who, by the age of 26, hasn't made a single documented mistake. In the autumn of 2015, he goes to the Himalaya for the first time. The objective they pick has a name that means little even to people who know the Himalaya. Nilgiri South, a summit 6,839 meters high in the Nilgiri Massif, in the north of central Nepal, not far from the far more famous Annapurna. By Himalayan standards, that's a modest figure, more than a kilometer lower than the 8,000ers that draw queues every season. And yet, by 2015, Nilgiri South had been climbed exactly once in its entire history. Once, while the mountains standing right next to it get dozens of ascents a year. The reason lies in the character of the mountain. It doesn't suit commercial expeditions. Too technical, the cost of a mistake too high, and there's almost nobody here to come and rescue you. People don't come here for altitude. They come here for the problem. The south face had never been climbed at all. It's about 1,500 meters high. And it's a face, not a slope. Ground you can't walk up, only climb. On the crux sections, the difficulty reaches M5, mixed ground where the tools hook onto rock holds, except now at an altitude where there's half as much air as down below. In places, the ice rears up at 90 degrees, which is to say vertical. Everything he's done up to now has happened at altitudes where the body copes without any special preparation. Alaska, Patagonia, the Alps, everywhere the ceiling is below 5,000. Here he'll be working at nearly 7. The only medicine against that kind of altitude is time to acclimatize, and there's never enough of it. Which of the 3 proposed the project, how long it had been brewing, who chased the funding, and how the preparation went? The sources say nothing. All that's left is the date where the documented part begins. On the 5th of October, 2015, they leave Austria. 4 of them travel. Hans-Jörg Auer is 31, Alexander Blumel 28, Gerhard Fiegl 26. He'll spend his 27th birthday on the route. The 4th is the photographer Elias Holzknecht. He isn't going on to the face. His work stays below, in base camp, where he shoots and keeps in contact. They pitch camp on the moraine directly under the south face at 4,600 meters. That's 350 meters higher than any previous expedition to this mountain. The decision looks like a trifle, but there's a precise reason behind it. Only from here can you see the whole face, from the foot to the ridge. A route that doesn't exist yet has to be seen first. You find the line where the terrain lets a person through and work out where you'll have to spend the nights. Higher up, at 5,200 to 5,300 meters, they set an advanced bivouac and spend 2 nights there. That's the acclimatization. You make the body work at altitude so it starts producing more red blood cells and learns to get by on thin air. 2 nights isn't much. Normally you'd allow weeks to get ready for ground at 7,000. The climb is planned in pure alpine style. That means no intermediate camps, no ropes fixed in advance, no supplies stashed higher up. Everything they need goes on their backs. They go up in one continuous push and come down the same way. Nobody has oxygen. The method honed in Alaska and on Fitzroy is carried over to the Himalaya intact. But there's one circumstance that makes the team unequal. Auer is acclimatized considerably better than the other two. He's just come back from Mount Kenya, 5,199 meters, where he was filming a documentary together with Reinhold Messner. His body has already adjusted. The other two have only what the advanced bivouac managed to give them. Down in the lowlands, a difference in acclimatization is invisible. Up high, it decides who moves steadily and who loses a little more pace with every hour. On the 22nd of October, they set off onto the route. Even before the team touches the face, the main thing is clear. Going back down the way they came up isn't an option. Auer puts it briefly. Too difficult, too laborious, too hard. 1,500 meters of mixed ground with ice sections at 90 degrees is a line that lets you up but won't let you back. So, the plan is built differently. They have to cross the whole mountain, up the south face, out onto the summit, and down the southwest ridge on the other side. The ridge is reckoned to be easier. At least that's how it looks in photographs and in the descriptions of the one previous ascent. That's how you get what climbers call a route of no return. Past a certain height, turning back is no longer possible. People take that on knowingly. On big walls, it's normal. But it means any problem that comes up on the route will have to be solved by moving forward. On the 23rd of October, they cross the Bergschrund at 5,400 meters. A Bergschrund is the break between the glacier and the body of the mountain, a wide crevasse where the real face usually begins. Above it comes a couloir ramp, a narrow gully in the rock, squeezed between walls at 60 to 90 degrees. Places like that are dangerous because they collect everything that comes down from above. Higher up the ground gets harder. Sections of M5 appear, and ice at around 70 degrees. A big rock gendarme stands in the way, a separate tower on the ridge that can't be avoided. The team names it the Nilgiri Spire. They get rounded on the western side, where the terrain lets them climb through. After an ice cliff at around 6,500 meters, they set up their first bivouac. In one day, they've gained something like 1,100 meters, a fast pace even by alpine standards. The nastiest part of the route will come the next day. On the 24th of October, they set off at 6 in the morning. The first task of the day is to reach the south ridge of the spire at 6,600 meters. From there, the way leads to the top of the tower itself, 6,780 meters, reached at 11 o'clock. But the spire is only an obstacle between them and the real summit, and climbing it isn't enough. They still have to get off it. The descent from the gendarme begins along a narrow corniced ridge. The wind carries snow across the ridge, and on the lee side, it freezes into a cornice hanging out over nothing. From the approach, that cornice looks like a continuation of the ridge, a smooth white strip under your boots. In reality, there's nothing beneath that strip. Walking a ridge like that means constantly guessing where the rock ends and the snow overhang begins, ready to break away under a person's weight. One of the sections they pass with a 30-meter free-hanging abseil. An abseil is a descent on the rope, and normally your feet are braced against the wall. Free-hanging means there's nothing to brace against. The rope hangs in the air, the man hangs on the rope, and for 30 meters he turns without a single point of contact. At 3 in the afternoon, they pitch a bivouac at 6,740 meters. The day has ended earlier than usual, but there's no choice. The ground ahead offers nowhere to lie down. From here on, simple arithmetic decides everything. This is the third day on the face, the second night in a row above 6,500 meters, all of it without oxygen, exactly as the chosen style assumes. At that altitude, the body doesn't recover in sleep. It carries on spending itself. Its own reserves drain away, dehydration builds, and appetite disappears precisely when food matters most. Every hour up there is a withdrawal from an account that can run out, and all three of them have a different balance. About how Fiegl felt that day, the sources report nothing. Not one account, not one remark. The first traces of what's happening to him will surface only the next morning. They set off at 8 in the morning, and within the first hour, something shows up that hasn't been there on any of the previous days. Fiegl is moving slower than usual. For a man who did the Tooth Traverse in 83 hours and Fitzroy in 21 and a half, that's so unlike him, it can't go unnoticed. Pace is his strong suit, the foundation of the method his whole climbing life is built on. When a man like that starts falling behind, the reason isn't laziness and it isn't ordinary tiredness. That's the first recorded sign. At nearly 7,000 meters, slowing down is a symptom, not a small thing. A body that stops coping with the lack of oxygen loses output first. Every step takes several breaths. Every movement costs more than it did the day before. Everything else follows in a rising sequence: coordination, clarity of thought. And the last thing to go is the ability to understand that something is wrong with you. About a kilometer of traverse still separates them from the summit. Not a climb, but movement across the slope along the ridge. On paper, the easiest part of the route after everything they've already done. Auer will say later that 200 meters below the summit, he was already certain something was wrong. Not a guess, not a suspicion, certainty. It comes to him before they ever reach the top. Although, strictly speaking, there's no choice left. This is exactly what they signed up for down at the Bergschrund. On the 25th of October at 11 o'clock, they're on the summit of Nilgiri South, the second ascent of this mountain in its entire history, the first ascent of the south face. The thing it was all started for is done. How long they spent up there, the sources don't specify. What Fiegl himself said at that moment is unknown. None of his words survive in any account. The descent starts immediately. With one of the three in the state he's in, there's no lingering. The team heads out onto the southwest ridge, the ridge the whole exit plan rests on. And almost at once it turns out that the photographs and the descriptions gave an incomplete picture of it. The ridge proves technically harder than expected. Instead of a steady loss of height, ground that demands work. Every meter downward has to be earned the same way the meters upward were. The calculation fails exactly where it was needed most. The one thing that could help a man with altitude sickness is losing height fast. Dropping a kilometer does more than any equipment and any help from partners. The ridge doesn't offer that. By 3 in the afternoon, at 6,500 meters, Fiegl is completely spent. He can't go any further. In 4 hours of descent, they have lost a little over 300 meters. They have to make a forced bivouac, that is, stop in a place where stopping was never planned because there's no alternative. According to Auer, by that point Fiegl was suffering badly from altitude sickness and no longer seemed to take in the situation. The wording is careful. Auer offers no diagnosis and doesn't describe symptoms in detail. He speaks about what he saw. The expedition's official statement mentions strong signs of exhaustion. Down below, Holzknecht is trying to call in a helicopter. He's in base camp. He has communications, and he does the one thing a man on the outside can do. Evacuation is impossible. Strong wind and too much altitude. 2 reasons, either of which would be enough on its own. 6,500 meters is close to the ceiling, at which a rotor can hold a machine in the air at all. And on a ridge like that, there's neither a spot to land nor any way to hover in a crosswind. There's nobody else left to count on. That leaves 3 men, one of whom can't walk on his own. The night passes in the cold and the wind, with no tent. The morning of the 26th of October brings a short improvement. It holds for about 2 hours. That happens. Overnight, the body sometimes partly compensates for the lack of oxygen, and for a short while, a man comes back to his old self. According to Auer, after those 2 hours, Fiegl has no strength left at all. They descend a sharp snow ridge, a narrow strip falling away on both sides. They move unroped. From the outside, that's hard to understand. Auer will explain it plainly. Working on the rope the whole time, in alpine style, on ground like that is impossible and simply isn't done. Setting up a belay on every section slows the movement down several times over. And on a snow ridge, there's often nowhere to place anything solid at all. A rope between 3 men on a narrow ridge also means that if one of them slips, he pulls the others with him. The team moves the way it is used to moving, by the very logic Fiegl's whole method is built on, and which, up to now, had always worked. At around 2 in the afternoon, at a height between 6,000 and 6,100 meters, they come to a small step. Over the past 24 hours, they have dropped some 400 meters. Here, Fiegl loses his balance. As Auer describes it, he falls without any strength, making no attempt to stop himself. A man who is conscious and has something left in reserve instinctively grabs at the slope and breaks with an ice tool. None of that happens here. The ground at that spot is technically easy. Not a vertical wall, not a cornice, not the crux of the route. An ordinary step, of the kind there are dozens of on the way down. That's precisely why it turned out to be dangerous. Where the terrain asks nothing of your attention, nobody is braced for a fall. The fall runs some 800 meters down the south face. the very face they had climbed from bottom to top, into the system of couloirs. Auer and Blumel see it from a few meters away. There's no rope between them and Fiegl, only a few steps that cannot be taken in time. Two of the strongest climbers in the country stand on the ridge and can do nothing. From here, the two of them have to get down alone. 3 abseils, then the same way they would have gone as 3. Neither of them is in any condition to stop. Dehydration, a second night without proper sleep, strength running out. They reach the glacier at around 6 in the evening. On the way they find traces of the fall, but there is no sign of Fiegl himself. The south face of Nilgiri is cut through by a system of couloirs, and everything that comes off above ends up in them. Combing through them without a rescue operation is impossible. The search begins the same day, but almost at once the weather steps in. Heavy snowfall moves in. Helicopter flights only become possible 2 days later, and they bring no result. By then, fresh snow has already covered everything that could have been seen from the air. Later, the family searched too, with the same outcome. Gerhard Fiegl stayed on the mountain. On the 1st of November, Auer, Blumel, and Holzknecht returned to Austria. 4 of them had left 27 days earlier. On the 14th of November, a farewell is held in Umhausen. In a village of 2,000 people, where he went to primary school, the people who knew him his whole life come together. The Umhausen section of the Austrian Alpine Club. It was through its training group that he came to the mountains in the first place. We'll write about him as one of its finest climbers. He was 27 years old. 3 days after his own birthday, he did not come back. The Ascent, meanwhile, stands. In climbing records, cases like this get a line of their own. Route recognized, one member of the team died on the descent. Working out what exactly happened on that ridge on the 26th of October has to be done from 2 accounts. There are no other witnesses. The official version is stated briefly: severe altitude sickness and complete exhaustion after a short acclimatization. No competing explanation ever appeared. Everything recorded while the trail was still warm agrees. No equipment failure, no avalanche, no rock fall, and no decision that anyone has disputed after the fact. And yet, on paper, the cause has never been established. Fiegl was never found. No medical report exists, and none can. His condition is judged only by what the men standing beside him saw. In the retellings, meanwhile, the story has picked up details over the years that aren't in the primary sources. The lines about cerebral edema and about hallucinations appeared exactly there, in popular accounts, not in the words of the people who were on the mountain. Auer said neither of those things. He gave no diagnosis and no description of visions. The numbers disagree as well. Different sources put the height at which the fall happened anywhere from 6,000 to 6,200 meters. The most likely range is 6,000 to 6,100. Even the dates disagree. Some publications place the summit day on the 26th of October. The detailed chronology of the American Alpine Journal gives the 25th, and that's the one that holds together internally. Every other event lines up around it without a contradiction. Discrepancies like that are normal in mountain stories. Everything known about those last 2 days is known from the words of 2 men, each of whom was by then on his 4th day above 6,000 meters without oxygen, with almost no sleep and no proper food. Those are exactly the conditions in which memory holds on to one thing and lets another slip. Nobody is at fault here. It's physiology. No formal technical analysis ever came from the federations or from the specialist press. No report, no inquiry, no public discussion of the causes. The story is known in exactly the form the 2 men who came back told it. What carried it on wasn't words. First, a line in the records. The climb went on to the long list of the Palais d'Or of 2016, the roll of 52 significant ascents of the season, drawn up every year by the most respected award in world mountaineering. And it's marked there plainly, with the loss of a team member. The specialist press called the 3 of them among the best prepared climbers in the world. But the important part didn't happen on any list. On the 19th of August, 2016, Auer and Blumel, both of whom had stood on that ridge, free climb a new route on the Kristallwand in the Ötztal, 10 minutes drive from the village where it all began. They name the route the loss of the demantoid. Demantoid is a green garnet, one of the rarest stones on Earth. The name means the loss of something that has no replacement. Simon Giedel, the man Fiegl climbed Fitzroy with, goes alone to the Cima Scotoni in the Dolomites and puts up a new route 550 meters long, which he calls Can You Hear Me? 2 new lines on rock, the only kind of monument that means anything in this profession. In 2017, Auer's book comes out, along with a film about him, and this story has a place of its own in both. Auer said that when you lose a friend in front of your eyes, everything else loses its meaning. And he said one more sentence that holds their whole shared history. They started climbing together, and at the end, he can say no more than, I'm sorry. The boy from Umhausen who rode his bike out to the crag and always went second behind his older friend. On the 16th of April, 2019, Hans-Jörg Auer did not come back from Howes Peak in Canada, together with David Lama and Jess Roskelley. The main witness to this story outlived it by 3.5 years. Of the rope team that stood on the summit of Nilgiri South on the 25th of October, 2015, only one came home.